Podcast. We're chatting about life, relationships, events, experiences, and anything in between. Joined with Adrian in this, our Quarter Life Quandary.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, we've got no Katie or Aaron today. Katie's away on holiday, and don't know where Aaron is. Nothing new.
Nice. Well, a holiday is well deserved, I'm sure. I haven't even thought about traveling for such a long time, and that seems like such a crazy thought. It was like a quite big part of my life at one point.
Yeah, I really want to get away, but I'm not prepared to have issues with going abroad, and then because no one else can get away, you can't travel in this country now without it costing an arm and a leg.
Absolutely, it's ridiculous. The whole thing has just made like layers of complexity upon layers of complexity, until I guess you just have to decide what's right for you in the end.
Yeah, but I'm going to Reading Festival at the end of the month.
So. Exactly, that's right for you. You know,
it'll be fun.
Yeah, of course it will be fun. When was the last time you went to a festival?
2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago.
2 years ago, 3 years ago. Yeah, me was it was 2019.
What festival was that?
It was We Out Here. I got a free ticket. It was kind of like this weird, like eclectic jazz, drum and bass, hip hop kind of thing. It was bizarre. It was cool though. I liked it.
Sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. I think it was a startup. It was some BBC DJ who I can't remember what his name was. Maybe he's not a BBC DJ. Some kind of DJ. I can't remember what his name was. He started it up in 2019, and obviously they had big plans for 2020, and certain things occurred, I guess, and it didn't happen. The elephant in the room, right?
I was going to say, I think everyone can guess what that was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess jumping off from that point, I mean, like, what have you been doing instead of doing the things that you would have done before, in this period? Because in the beginning, there was like this big push for everyone to be super motivated and achieve loads of things. And like, I don't necessarily like subscribe to that, right? I think that's a little bit toxic. But like, I do think it is interesting to look at what like you have been doing and how you've been like keeping sane, right?
I'm going to be completely honest. My life has not changed at all. It's being in like construction. It actually made my job a hell of a lot more difficult.
Right.
But the work face didn't change pretty much at all. I basically didn't socialise with people. But I moved house during that time.
That must have been an experience, though, moving house during the pandemic.
No, it wasn't. It was not. I lost a lot of money because I was selling a flat, and then all of a sudden, everyone's stuck indoors, and everyone's realised the thing that they want more than anything in a home is a garden.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Trying to sell a flat. And then everyone's losing jobs and getting worried. So ended up losing the first person who put an offer in because they couldn't get a mortgage anymore. It was a bit. It's more the social aspect of it, really, and it's kind of one of the reasons why I started doing this, because it was a way to connect to people, and it actually made me realise how much I get on with my partner.
That's a really positive thing to have found out through this period.
Yeah, right? You'd normally think like a lot of people have like clashed heads, but it kind of like solidified how I felt.
Wow. So like, how is that kind of manifested then? I guess you're together a lot, or maybe even more than you were before.
Yeah, more so now because obviously, well, we weren't living together at the time. We were buying a house together. This is the house we bought together. So we were seeing each other a lot more because she was staying with me. So, it was like that kind of pre-emptive move in. Let's actually test the waters before we do jump in fully. So it was definitely worth doing. That's definitely
Nice.
one of my key pieces of advice to anyone is if you're ever thinking of buying a house with someone, is rent a house or let them move in with you for six months and figure it out because you don't really know someone until you live with them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many potholes that you can face when you're cohabiting with someone that closely.
Well, a lot you got to remember, like most of the time, if you're seeing someone or in a relationship, when you go to see them, you're happy
Yeah,
because you're seeing them, and
yeah,
then you've only got to put on a brave face, but you've only got to show your best self for what 4 or 5 hours,
yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
just the Saturday,
Hmm.
and then you can go back to you miss all the anger, you miss all the disappointment, you miss all of the stress, the sleepiness, the bad habits.
Hmm.
So
Right. It's like a mediated situation, right?
of
Because it's
course,
only
yeah,
a short period of time.
yeah, and it's the same with like when you start dating someone. That's the whole honeymoon period, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what that whole thing is. And you're not gonna go up to someone who you're trying to be with and you know profess that you pick your nose or you only shower once a week or whatever it is that everyone's
No,
got
no, because if
gremlin.
you only showered once a week, then you'd make sure that you showered the time that you were going to see your partner,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I think that's like pretty interesting, and also something that like you don't really or you don't really think about until you're faced with a situation when you are reassessing all of your relationships and all of your social interactions in your life, which is something, once again, I think this kind of like period of time has kind of made us confront, right?
Well,
um
I do that. I've done that anyway previously, but
mm,
I totally that's the curse of working on your own for a long time,
yeah,
or like if you're a trucker or sole worker on something, you've got a lot of time in your own head, and that's the sort of things you go over.
yeah, having a more isolated, I guess, like situation to your life just kind of prepared you for this situation.
I would say so. Yeah, I mean, it isn't easy when you've got kids
Mm,
because you can see that they're missing out on social interactions
yeah.
with their peers, and it does not worry me, but it does make me wonder how that's going to affect them later on.
Absolutely. How have they been, especially the older ones who have, I guess, a bit further on the path of like education and stuff like that.
Do you know what? They've been fine.
Yeah.
It, that side, I'm not too worried about. It was like when everything started to reopen up, and it was like, oh, we're going out and doing swimming, and they'd had like a blind panic of, but this is something that could hurt me,
Oh
and you're
wow.
like, that's you can kind of see how really ingrained it is, and you're like having to reassure them that it is a real thing, but you don't have to worry about it. Things are
Right.
moving on and progressing, and that's kind of like an ingrained fear. But as soon as they start like running around the park, it soon fades.
Do you like? I think that's actually really interesting because it will be affecting loads and loads of kids, but also think about, I guess, like the hesitancy that adults will also be kind of thinking about, whether it's going back to the office if they've been lucky enough to have a job that they could have worked from home with, or whether it's going to a festival, like going back to what we were talking about before. Like, I don't know personally whether I can deal with my anxiety well enough to put myself into like a gig situation again. And like, me, music was like quite a big part of my life, and now it just feels, it does feel, it's in that anxiety inducing. And if that's something that I as an adult am feeling, how is that then going to affect children who have gone through some formative years? because it's coming along to nearly 2 years now,
Mm.
um, in this situation. And I guess, I mean, something that I would be interested to know is just like, how do you cope with those struggles as a father? Because obviously it must be so deeply emotional.
You just gotta have an open conversation with them about things like that. And to be honest, I honestly don't think it's going to affect my kids as much as it might have affected a only child, because
Mm,
they've got siblings and step siblings. So there was always a little bit of mixing that was just, that they could do. And my youngest, at least she had older siblings that she could kind of socialise with. I could imagine that an only child, especially a toddler or a baby, when they first meet another baby, they're going to be
mm,
very confused, not having
yeah.
them like play date interactions, or like restricted nursery and stuff like that. And the same as like, if you go back to when it was lockdown teaching,
Mm,
like I'm not a teacher in any form.
right. Yeah.
I can do the work and I can help my son do the work, but I was never trained and I'm not fully coherent in their new methods, because you'd be surprised how quickly school changes with how the learning methods are,
Mm,
and things like how they do the times tables now, or tens and units, or in the early years they're called sticks and dots.
right.
So
Okay.
not only are you trying to teach your child, but you're also trying to learn as well, and they can't tell you what they already know. They can't, you know,
Mm.
uh, they can't be trying to teach you as well as
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
learn. So you're
Yeah.
trying to pick it up as you go, and then especially if you were working from home as well,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
there's a lot of juggling going on.
Yeah, and I guess it's also a thing about space. Like, dependent on how big your family is, where is everyone going to work from or study
Oh,
from?
there's literally, I've barely got the room to house the kids when we're not trying to work, or
Mm, no.
you know, we've got two laptops in this house and a rake of iPads. So as soon as anything like needs printing, or someone needs to go onto a document or something, it just becomes an absolute nightmare. We've got one desk in this house,
Yeah.
which
That's
was like preemptive kind of thing that we put in, but you got six people in a house, you've only got
yeah.
one desk.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not conducive to work or learning at that point, and it's nobody's fault. It's just the situation, right? Like,
Mm.
you haven't designed your living space to also be your workspace and also to be a school and also to be a socializing area. It's like it had a different purpose before all of this. It's been like recontextualized by current events, and that I think that's really tough for people. So I live on a narrowboat, right? And I had to isolate for 10 days on this 50-foot tube that's 6 foot wide. And it was a bit of peaks and troughs, right? In the beginning it was fine, and then it started to not be fine because that space is not designed to house anyone to just stay inside for like that length of time. The whole point of that kind of living environment is that you take advantage of the great outdoors kind of thing. And so in
I
some
can
ways that yeah
I
sorry
can imagine there's a quite a big onset of cabin fever when you're in a steel tube for a timber tube for 10 days.
Yeah, absolutely. You're thinking about all the things that you want to do. You're thinking about all the things that you should be doing, the things you can't do, the people you want to see, the people you can't see, and eventually you just kind of run out of things to do. Um, but on another level, when I wasn't isolating on the boat, I felt like really privileged because I'd moor up kind of by these flats, and I would think you've got families of four, five, six in these council flats. They got no garden. They're all going to the park, right? And that park's just outside my boat, which is effectively my back garden. But then you have like sun journalists coming and shooting pictures of people with long lenses, right? And like then shaming them. I remember seeing one headline that actually had my boat in the picture. Um, and it was like on the front page, and they were just like, they were like, look at these people breaking lockdown restrictions or whatever. And I was just thinking, these people are mostly, um, they're mostly like people who live in flats, who don't have that much space, who maybe have larger families, and they need to use this space. And by sitting back and kind of not taking into account the fact that this kind of situation has isolated people, and dependent on how you experience that isolation, it can be easier or it can be harder, you know um and I think there's been a lot of that over the last year, and there's been a lot of rhetoric about how we're all in this together, with no recognition that this is very different dependent on who you are.
Oh yeah, and also the privilege you've been brought through with as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's a lot easier to spread out 5 people in a 10-bed mansion with
Yeah.
2 acres of land than it is to, you know, try and homeschool 4 children in a two and up the two up two down.
And you think this would be obvious to people, but it doesn't seem to be that
Of
obvious to
course, it's not
people.
obvious to people. People don't see past their own nose.
Yeah. I heard somewhere that like I can't remember who was saying this, but they were like, if you look at any piece of kind of major COVID legislation and put it up to a timeline of the prime minister's like events in his life, they usually line up. Like certain restrictions and certain things just ease when it's better for him. And like, I'm not going down that conspiracy theory route, but I would move past that to think that actually that because these policymakers are making legislation based on their perspective, their context, their experience, which would be middle to upper class experiences, it's just going to benefit those situations more than it's going to benefit someone who's working class or in precarious work. You know what I mean?
I think that was very well put.
No, thank you.
Because I wouldn't have been that eloquent with how I said that.
I just think it's quite a hard topic to kind of stay objective with, right? Because these policies and this legislation affects people's lives, and so you get really emotional about it when it's entirely constructed by things like ideology and class.
It's difficult to put trust in a politician, in my opinion, when they generally haven't had a real working life.
Right.
Because
Yes.
politics now kind of requires you to have a degree in
Hmm.
politics.
Yeah.
And if that's the route you took all them years ago or back in university, or even if you've done it recently, that's been generally something you want to do. And it's not the average man who is a politician anymore.
Right. And there's kind of like, as I think, from a bit of a, I guess, an outside, like, I have not studied politics, I'm just like have an passing interest in it. It's just like the systems and structures that we've built has just got so complex that instead of being a representative system, that benefits the people, it's just this bureaucratic structure with civil servants and politicians, career politicians, who kind of do this dance where, making a policy announcement is more about saying, I did this thing, rather than saying this thing will benefit wider society, right? Because, the education secretary making an announcement about an education policy, if it's successful or if it's a failure but the media cycle moves on, he's still the guy who did that, or she's the person who did that. Um, and I think that's just like a really damaging, toxic way that our politics is going, because, you know, you're right, it doesn't represent the everyday working person. And then beyond that, the policies and the legislation that they put through aren't being thought with long-term consequences, because they can reverse it, or they can do U-turns, or they can turn around and change their mind. And so there's no vision and there's no project, right? Like, if I asked you what Johnsonism was as like a political project, could you tell me? Because I couldn't tell you.
No.
It just seems like it's whatever suits them at that time to retain power, to retain their careers.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's knee jerk reactions most of the time, and it's so I do slightly forgive the COVID aspect of it, because I think any politician would struggle,
Oh,
but
absolutely. It
it
was
it did
unprecedented.
it did feel there was a massive failing in all of what's happened.
Okay, but like, whilst I respect that it's going to be hard for any politician to be able to deal with that situation, I think like a really interesting way of seeing how these problems occurred, or how these failings occurred, is they just have to look at, the testing system when you travel from a green light country, or whatever they're calling it now, to the UK, right? You have to take a series of tests. There's no oversight over the companies that produce these tests. So there's no legitimacy, like there's no proof that these things actually have much accuracy, right? We don't know, but they're still costing hundreds of pounds, right? And that's because the government, they think that competition within free market capitalism is the best way to create better products. But what we see here is just hundreds of companies that have been given money, government money, our tax money, to create products that they may or may not have had experience making before this, and then sell it to the wider public so that they can travel and do the things that we used to do and that they want to continue to do. And so it's what is that actually achieving at that point in terms of being a COVID safe policy? Sure, it's testing, but it's not rigorous testing, it's not robust testing, and there's no oversight committee or oversight body to tell us that these things actually work. So, I mean, it sounds like a grift to me, if I'm going to be brutally honest.
It's as you said, the system that's always put in place always benefits the middle to upper class.
Yeah.
And generally the people who can start up these companies quickly to turn around these sort of ideas are generally upper to middle class.
Yeah, right. Because
So
where are you going to get that investment from?
exactly, and generally you've only got to look at the PPE scandal from right in the past, and it was
Yeah.
passed to people that were known. It's just
Well, Matt
you,
Hancock's pub landlord, right? That was the most
yeah,
famous one,
yeah.
right? And then, yeah, it says it all.
The thing is, when you speak to people about it, Boris Johnson is. Do you know about the clown school in Paris? Is it Paris?
I don't know about it, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was a
Right.
clown school in Paris.
There's a very very famous clown school, and I'm pretty sure it's in Paris. And a lot of very famous performers go to this performing arts college,
Hmm.
and there is a lot of very famous comedians as well. The only one I can think of is Sacha Bon. What the fuck's his last name? The guy who did Borat,
Sacha Baron Cohen.
Baron Cohen, not Bon Cohen. Yeah, he went to this school, and I was watching a documentary on it, and they showed his old teacher,
Hmm.
and what he said is, you can control a room when everyone thinks you're the idiot.
Right. Yeah. So that is exactly what Boris Johnson does. Um,
Exactly.
I heard
It's
this. I heard this anecdote about Boris Johnson, right? And it was some journalist, maybe it was like the economics editor for the BBC a few years ago, and he was saying that he met Boris Johnson at this event where he's doing a speech, and he was coming on stage, and he was all flustered, and he was like, oh, I wasn't prepared for this, I don't know what to say, but I'm so happy to be here. And he turns around to check the sign behind him, and then he says the name of the event, and he controls the room, and everyone's applauding and laughing, and they're just like, "Oh, Bojo," right? A year later, the same journalist sees Boris Johnson at another event and sees him do the exact same routine, right? And then that anecdote within itself just tells you how controlled that persona is, right? Even using the name Boris, right? That's not his first name. It is
No.
one of his names. His name's Alexander, right?
Yeah.
So like it's a totally mediated persona in order to kind of put you at ease, to make you think that, you know, this guy is kind of a lovable buffoon, um and you want, and who is also a man of the people, even though, you know, he went to Eton and Oxford and all the rest. Yeah, it's insane that it took people quite so long to also see through that. And also I find it a little bit still unnerving that he's our prime minister, to be honest
I
with you.
don't think as many people as you would assume see through the facade that he creates. Everyone, they kind of look at it, it kind of humanizes him to the point where he turns into your air quotes mate,
Yeah,
the guy that you work with. He is a normal person that makes mistakes.
yeah,
So
exactly.
then it's very hard to villainize him when everyone around you is going, "Oh, he's trying his best. Look at him. He can't even get his words out straight." I'm like, well, this is not the kind of thing this is not the kind of person you want to run a country.
No, not
You
at
know,
all.
who seems to be bumbling and flustering, but it is a facade. You know,
Yeah.
it falls back to the whole. Um, how would you put it? Like I've always tried to be funny because it's easier to flirt with someone when you're
Yeah.
making them laugh and they've got their eyes closed.
Yeah,
You know, they
yeah,
haven't got
yeah,
to look at you.
he's doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also though we have to remember that whilst on some level this behavior which helps him run campaigns and win elections, and makes him trusted by the people, there are consequences to that further than just people thinking, oh, you know, he's human, he's just a bloke, he makes mistakes too, which gets him off the hook. What happens, in my opinion, is that it also gets other cabinet members and other politicians off the hook. We just have to think about Priti Patel. I mean, Priti Patel, who, you know, he was like, there was allegations of bullying, so he said there had to be some kind of inquiry. There was the inquiry. They presented their results. He read it and he said, okay, that's fine, but she's got a pass. So ultimately, at the end of that inquiry, the author of the report ended up resigning rather than the person who was allegedly bullying her civil servants. And then you can think of like Rupert Jenrick with housing, didn't stand down from his post after having like private meetings with it was this housing developer that's also friends with Boris Johnson. So you start seeing like cronyism there. I mean, Dominic Cummings, Barnard Castle, not resigning after that. There's like
Yeah.
then becomes this whole, you can do anything.
Yeah.
You can
Again,
do it.
it's if you're making the laws or the
Mhm.
policies, then you know you can bend them as you need.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. And get
and
away with
as well
anything.
as when you start looking at who owns the newspapers and who controls the media, they're all friends.
Right, of course.
And
Yes.
then even when you're like, if they're not your friends, then they're someone else's friends.
Hmm.
Or if you're Jeffrey Bezos, just buy the fucking newspaper.
Yeah, yeah. I
Do you know what
mean,
I mean? It's just
Washington
what
Post had a article a few weeks ago that was talking about how billionaires were good for the planet, and I was thinking, Jeff Bezos has just fired himself into space using 1950s technology in a rocket ship shaped like a penis, and you're telling me that's better for wider society? That's not the Soviet space race. You know, that's not the Americans and the Russians trying to like best each other in science and technology. That's a
rather than
manhunt.
have a war,
Yeah, rather than
rather
have
than
a
have a war.
yeah, yeah,
That was the reason.
for
This,
sure. That was the reason, but at least there was something there. I mean, this
I
is
mean, it
just
was a better reason.
yeah, it was a better reason for
This
sure.
isn't an ego stroke of a billionaire.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, yeah, that's where it is. I would rather see like human, like space. like if we're like going to go on space, but so if we're going to fire men and women and non-binary individuals and all the rest into space, then then it should be for the betterment of like wider society, not Jeff Bezos, his porn star lookalike brother, and like two randoms he picks out to make it seem like a community project.
In all honesty, I really couldn't give a fuck what he does
Mm.
if he would pay his fair share.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, the amount that he gets away with and that goes for all these upper class people. You
yeah,
know, if you can pay enough money to an accountant to find all of the loopholes, and you know,
yeah.
the whole thing with these very, very large corporations don't pay a lot of tax because they employ so many people that the
Mm-hmm.
government aren't interested in taxing them. It's
Like
just a
too
fucking
big to
joke.
fail kind of thing. It is a joke because you think like, that money could definitely be used for infrastructure purposes, for state purposes, all that other kind of stuff, of course. But also, it's just when you have politicians pushing forward this idea of like the free market, right? The free market should be based on a level playing field. And that's not happening when the largest companies in the world aren't paying corporation tax. Yet your small businesses, your mom and pop businesses, your startups are. How is that a competitive free market? I don't know.
Do you know what? It wouldn't even be that bad if you didn't know the whole story.
Hmm.
So this is American based, but I'm sure it happens all over the world. So did you ever hear of a company called diapers.com?
No, I didn't. What? Tell me about
Right.
diapers.com.
So you can imagine what they sell,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
and they were the online lead seller of nappies to the Americans.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pause this for 1 sec. Hold on. You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Right. What was I saying?
You're talking about diapers.com.
Right. So diapers.com lead selling in the nappy sales to the Americans,
Yeah.
and Amazon or whatever parent company it was said to them, "Right, we want to buy your company," and they said, "No, we,
Okay.
we're not. We don't. We're not interested in selling." Um, so what Amazon did was they starting to sell nappies and to bring people over, which is it's a fair idea at the start. They were selling them not at cost, below cost.
Yeah.
They were losing money
Mm.
on every nappy they sold, to the point where there was a comment made by a high manager that they were prepared to lose something like $5 million in nappies just so this company would fail.
My
When
God.
the company went bankrupt, they bought them at low.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, that sounds like, I guess, what some probably sociopath would call good business. Like,
Um, there is a line in offering someone a deal,
yeah.
you know, getting
Yeah.
that repeat business, but not to the point where it's not even like we're not talking about a little corner shop war between two shops selling, the toilet roll a penny cheaper than next door.
Yeah.
We're talking one mammoth company and one large company going head to head, to the point where it's only going to lead to global domination.
Right. And so that's what we would call a monopoly, right?
Yeah.
And once again, is a monopoly, good for the quote unquote free market,
Well, of
right?
course not, because what do you think happened to Amazon selling nappies after that company
Oh,
went
it hiked up, surely.
straight back to normal?
Of course. Yeah.
Exactly the same thing that Uber's done to taxis.
And so yeah, absolutely. Uber's a great example of that. That was almost genius if it wasn't so diabolical. But I guess the real problem is we are just barreling towards monopolies, and these monopolies aren't, or I guess, like, because there's multiple of them, I guess oligopolies. Um, like within, you'll have Uber, Bolt, and Lyft, and there's space for like three. But if you had like a community startup of local taxi drivers who are like, Uber is killing us, there would be no space for that, um, but the consumer is not the bottom line, right? The people who are using the product is not what the main goal is, right? The main goal is maximizing profits.
Mm.
And so that will be done by doing things like price hikes, and it will also be done by like exploiting workers, so the troubles faced by both Amazon workers and Uber drivers. And then you just got to think, once again, who is this benefiting? It's not benefiting me.
No, and no, it only benefits the people at the top.
But then what do you do? Because we can pontificate. I love that word, by the way. But we could talk all day, pontificate all day about how these laws, these policies, these legislations, this almost like ideology of I don't know, this like a right wing libertarianism, um, is leading us down this path. Um, but like, what do we do? Because we all know it's unfair. But what power do we hold as people? Because I don't know if I believe in any of that anymore, to be honest with you.
Well, you don't.
Like, yeah,
You
exactly.
don't, because let's be honest. The people, me rightly saying Amazon's a crock of shit.
Hmm.
I still buy from Amazon
Absolutely, it's convenient.
because it's very, very convenient. But if I find something, a lot of the time you realise that there are actual people selling via Amazon. Amazon aren't buying all this stuff
No.
and selling it. They are just what you would call a holder and a deliverer.
Yeah, for
So that, and
sure.
then they take a cut. So it's people or large companies that are selling these items. So if you find it on Amazon, most of the time you can go direct to the person and you can knock out that 20%.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to do the work.
Nobody wants to do that. But also, I have an example of when I did that, and it basically, because it was a smallish company and they held all their product at the Amazon warehouse anyway, it all came for like Amazon delivery drivers, Amazon boxes anyway,
Mm.
But oh yeah, also 4 weeks later, because it had to be internally processed rather than processed through Amazon. Um, so you can try and avoid it, but it's almost unavoidable. So then I guess you just have to hope that at some point someone's going to think maybe it isn't great if instead of Tesco's and Morrison's and Asda and Sainsbury's, we now have these Amazon grocery stores. Because in London they opened up their first grocery store.
Mm.
Um, and they're doing food deliveries and they're doing kind of everything, and they own half the internet. And when I say that, I mean like cloud hosting services.
Oh yeah.
So that's also another thing that people don't think about. They're like, I'm going to boycott Amazon, I'm not going to buy from Amazon. And it's like, do you use the internet? Do you search around Google? Because there are connections there. You know what I mean? You're probably unintentionally using those services at any point during your day, um, so, and then that takes us in a circle again, where it's like, well, where is the power? Because you can't have that individual protest, that individual boycott. You could take to the streets, you could strike with a union, but ultimately, unions don't have any power anymore. People protesting. I mean, like major mainstream media outlets don't really cover it, and to be honest, it's all spectacle anyway. So you have to hope that a politician is going to think, or like thinkers, and have like what I'm saying is a politician will surround themselves with the correct thinkers to come up with policies that benefit society, but they won't do that when there's this idea of competition but not fair, if you know what I mean.
And it also won't happen when they're buddies.
And they won't happen when they're buddies and they're cronies and they're all like, yeah, having dinners together. No, it's definitely not going to happen.
So that thing about there is a bit of a due to be paid to Amazon, because I have seen how they fulfill their shipments, and they do spend a lot of money on redoing their own internal warehouses to speed up this kind of stuff, to make it almost impossible to compete with them. But a lot of their money that they do get, they reinvest, but that's
And
only to become a super giant. But
so, okay, but going on from there, if you've seen like the inner workings, would you say that they're moving more to a fully automated situation, and eventually that these hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of workers that they employ will eventually lose out?
they are already semi-automated anyway. The
So
thing
if
is that they have they have pickers
Mhm.
and they have shippers. But in terms of from where you stand in your station and tag a box, stick it on a line, and from you to the driver, that's all automated. And
That's mad.
when I say that this warehouse is 15, 20 odd football fields long,
Yeah,
you can't. I honestly can say that when you stood at one end and you look to the other side, you can't focus on the back wall. It's that far.
yeah. Oh, like I guess that it's, the scale of it is so hard to get your head around. But jumping off from that point, so this is a huge company with a huge monopoly over the international market of kind of everything now. It has
Mm.
huge automated warehouses that don't employ people. There's a limited amount of jobs going in this company, and it has intentionally been designed so that it's very hard to climb up the ranks, right? Jeff Bezos didn't want a long-term workforce that would stay for 10, 15, 20 years working its way up in the company, bringing in new ideas. He wanted control with a group of people at the top that still retain power over the whole operation. So what we're seeing through that is this huge monopoly employing less and less people, less and less ideas, diversity of ideas, and going in one direction and one direction only, and something that benefits them.
I think that's perfectly fine as a company. Maybe not the scale that they're going at, but if you're a company, you want to do that, fine.
But it's
The
the
prob-
scale.
the problem is no regulation of the scale,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing. There is monopoly laws out there,
Yeah.
which is like why Rupert Murdoch couldn't buy
Of
Sky
course. Yeah.
News or something years ago,
Yeah.
because you control too much and it won't be allowed. But the problem is things like delivery service. It's not seen as a monopoly in
Mm-hmm.
such, because
Yeah.
the actual seller is not Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
It's on behalf of Amazon, fulfilled,
Mm-hmm.
and the same with the servers.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very, it's very, very new tech in terms of policy law,
Mm-hmm.
that you can't have all your servers in one place.
Yeah. But
And
then like where's the accountability for that, right? Like it's all technically Amazon, but they're selling on behalf of someone else. If you get a dud product, like can you complain to Amazon? Can you get your money back because of someone, like, let's say, drop shipping through Amazon? So buying a bunch of like hokey gear from China or wherever, and then false advertising on Amazon, and you just you order a extra large black comfy hoodie and you get a kind of off brown medium hoodie with holes
oh
in the
yeah,
front.
you'll get your money back
Oh well,
almost
then
almost instantly, and then they will chase the seller for the money lost.
that's so there must be a margin that they are so huge that they are able to absorb those losses.
Of course,
That's
you've
terrifying.
only got to look at the destroy value. Have you heard
Okay.
about the destroy
No,
value?
tell me about the destroy value.
Right. So what they have is they have containers and containers, and this is well known. This isn't just insider
Hmm.
information, because
Yeah.
I'm not working at a warehouse anymore. Um, that they what it is it obviously costs them to store the material, and if the material is not selling, they will drop price to a
Hmm.
point where they are giving it away,
Yeah.
not for free, but giving it away
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah.
And if it still doesn't sell, they will destroy it, because it cost more to them to send it back to the original seller than it does to destroy it.
And where does that waste go?
It just goes straight to landfill. And we're talking like any item you can get on Amazon, they might knock off 10% of that straight into landfill. And they donate less than that to charities.
That's, and then this is the conversation that I think, needs to be having, that we need to be having, or politicians need to be having. They need to be taking that kind of stuff seriously because, ultimately we're going to have a situation where we kind of already have a situation where, to be honest, if you look at what happened with the banks in 2008, like to go back 12 or so years, under the system that we existed in, if you go bust, you go bust. But we had governments bailing out private institutions. And since then, you kind of understood that these public services were kind of working for these private institutions rather than working for the people. And then what's happening now is, as these institutions, or institutions like Amazon, or individuals like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, Peter Thiel with Palantir, like as you see them getting more and more power and influence, like what we have no protection over that. And do you think, Elon Musk being able to send 40,000 satellites into our low Earth orbit is going to benefit anyone other than Elon Musk in the long run?
I don't know. It's difficult because it's a difficult standpoint because the commercialism side of it helps in technological advancements, but it doesn't help in their maintenance.
Yeah.
So what he's doing with his, is it Skynet or Satnet or something?
I have no idea.
He is going to be able to provide you with internet access anywhere in the country, in the world.
And that will be great, I guess, if it's affordable and it's accessible to everyone. Then for sure, I see that as a kind of like digital utopia.
But you have to remember that the internet cost quite a lot of money, even for dial-up speed, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So that original investment has come a long way and needs to be paid off.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the technological advances are good for, consumerism kind of lead-based thing. But if you look at the power networks that we currently have, they are under-maintained, failing, and need urgent upgrading to be moving forward with this electric vehicle future that we're potentially looking at. And that's where things start to go wrong.
Yeah.
Because they're more than happy to put stuff up to get paid. They're not very happy when profits start going down for maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, like that is kind of like thinking two steps forward without thinking about what you need to achieve first to make that possible. It's like on a lower scale than what Elon Musk was trying to achieve. But I think David Cameron, maybe even like something like 10 years ago, announced that the whole country was going to have fiber optic internet. And, that was actually a much bigger challenge than originally envisioned. Like the way that policy was announced was like, oh yeah, in the next couple of years we're all going to have super fast broadband. And like now you have people still in the sticks who barely have 3G, in terms of mobile phone coverage. There's no way they're going to have fiber optic internet. So it's like, yeah.
Well, that's where that kind of Elon Musk style technology will be great, especially in like rural America.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the issue with that is the companies that are leasing out the internet are not going to be willing to pay that kind of money to roll out something for you to then basically have to give it away.
Yeah.
Which is what, Labour was laughed at about, 2.5 years ago?
Yeah, the 2019 election.
And then what happens with every kid's now at home?
Yeah.
You've got 4 or 5 people trying to use the internet once. I mean, our internet is constantly dropping out still,
Yeah.
and they won't see it as a problem because by the time it's the latency dropout.
So it's kind of interesting in this scenario, in this context, and how everyone is kind of now facing these internet issues and internet accessibility issues, because about 3 or 4 years ago, I used to work with a refugee charity, and we would go into camps and we would provide people with access to mobile phones and internet data, access to, emails and just maps, being able to like look at a map and kind of know where you are. I'm not going to get into the politics of like freedom of movement and all that other kind of stuff. I think it's like way too complex an issue. But in terms of the ability to, when pretty much every person on the planet walks around with a micro like computer in their pocket with access to the internet, to remove that from someone is kind of making them subhuman at this point. And I know I'm using that rhetoric in kind of like a provocative way, right? Because I know it's not actually making them subhuman.
No, it totally is. It totally is. If you look at the science of our brains compared to our parents, our brains are now rewired to not retain information
Yeah,
as
I
well
had
as our
heard this.
parents because we have grown up with the power. Us as a generation can find things. We know how to find things quickly and efficiently, more so than our parents, which is why you always get the "come fix my computer, I don't know what's going on,"
Yeah, yeah.
because we can find the detail, but we don't retain it unless absolutely necessary. I can't remember anyone's phone number anymore.
No,
There
yeah.
used to be a time 20 years ago I could list out 15, 16 telephone numbers,
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
all 11 digits long, all with great precision.
The only reason why I know my phone number now is because I've had the same phone number since we were at college.
Well, I've had the same phone number for about 10 years because of work, and I have to I pretty much give out my telephone number once a week for site deliveries and site contacts and stuff like that. So I'm constantly using it.
But you also can like, well, using being able to recall that number, you mean that specific number.
Oh yeah, because someone will say, "What's your telephone number?"
Yeah, so
I
it's the
couldn't remember.
repetition of that.
Yeah,
But if you were to be like, what's your partner's number? Like, do you know your partner's number?
no, I couldn't even tell you one digit of it. Not a single digit. Because why
Yeah.
would you? Because it's
Yeah, yeah.
stored in your phone.
Yeah, it's in
I
your
know
favorites.
where I know where to access it.
Yeah, absolutely. You can it's data is sorry, it's data retrieval. That's what
Yeah.
that is. It's but so I was actually thinking about this earlier. If we're going to go on to data retrieval, then something that I do think is problematic about the way that we retrieve data, and I think we've kind of we've talked about this before, not here, not on this podcast, but we have talked about this before, but like critically thinking about the data that we're retrieving. I was thinking we live in a hyperlinked society, right? So, the Wikipedia hole thing, like when you go down a Wikipedia hole.
I do all the time.
Exactly, right? But if you start doing that and you're not critically analyzing how you're going from A to B to C to D to E, right? And you started connecting up those dots and you start making these lines between these dots is like very important. You're like, this is really important information. Um, you lead to like QAnon. You lead to like conspiracy theories. You lead to everything being like an Easter egg hunt, right? Because you're falling down a rabbit hole of hyperlinks, and these hyperlinks just they connect to each other. The whole internet is effectively connected. It's the Kevin Bacon thing, but like on steroids. And yeah, we might be great at searching things out. We might be great at data retrieval, but I really don't think that we're great at analyzing the data that we retrieve and how we got there.
100% agree. When was you taught critical thinking?
I had it was an optional module at college in second year of college. Optional module.
Why is it not taught in school?
No idea.
It depends how you want to look at it, really. Because do you want, as a consumer-driven world, to have potentially the low end of the workforce critically pulling on every string when you ask them to do something?
Hmm. No, probably not, because that probably wouldn't be efficient in order getting things done.
When you're dealing with adolescent minds, do you want to teach them critical thinking when you're trying to get them to retain pointless history dates?
No, well, I mean, like, if your end goal is to teach them skills, that's kind of like teach them skills for skills' sake. Like, I think learning history is a really important skill if tied with critical thinking.
Exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make, is this the fact that it's not beneficial
Mm-hmm.
to the sort of people or our class. You know, critical thinking is a must. And again, it's not just the school's fault, it's parents' fault as well. We very much live in a world where you do as your parents tell you, you don't question your parents.
Mm-hmm.
That is the squash of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm just as guilty as it of it, but you get to a certain age, and if you're not questioning why and how,
Mm-hmm.
something's wrong. But then if you're not then looking deeper and saying, but why have they written this? And who is it written on behalf of?
Yeah.
What is their end goal?
Yeah.
And what are their predispositions?
Yeah.
Then you're missing something,
Yeah.
because you're missing it's the fine top layer. It's like oil on water. You're not going to drink that water if you notice the oil.
Yeah.
But why is it there? You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Who put it there?
there's a fine film on every information that you go through. So it's also the sort of reason that all history is whitewashed.
Yeah.
And then the worst part of it, I think, is that the internet is great.
Yeah.
I love it. I absolutely 100% never ever want to see it go.
Yeah.
But there's so many people out there who now have a voice and they want to use that voice, and that's fine.
Yeah.
The problem is other people don't realise that you're sitting in an echo chamber
Mm-hmm.
and you're hearing the same thing, and they're rechurning out disinformation with no research. You know, a lot of people, when you say this, conspiracy theorists are the best for this, because they'll say, I've done my research.
Yeah.
Well, what research have you done?
Yeah.
You know, you've watched a YouTube video
Mm-hmm.
by someone who already had a predisposition for the government and doesn't want them, you know, thinks
Yeah.
that they're
Yeah.
poisoning them anyway.
Yeah.
And then you feel the same because your life's not growing great. So all of a sudden, you know, you're basing facts on feelings without doing proper research. You're not following the sources. You're not
Also, that
questioning the authors. You're not the actual authors, but you know, you're not questioning their motive on. But you're not going to find out who paid for this research. It's great. It's great when research is done, and then you look at who's actually paid for it, and it's, oh great, the person that they're saying is the best paid for the research.
But it's all about confirming biases, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like they're not, when they've done their research, it's not that they're open or willing to be proven wrong. They want to be proven what they already believe, you know? It's like well, all conspiracy theory, but also like, you know, the of course at the moment, because of the situation that we're in, there's a lot of like anti-vax stuff going on at the moment. And the thing is you're never going to convince someone who you know, has been adversely affected by this situation, who was already suspicious of government control, and who is receiving information from dubious sources, that this thing that they believe is going to set them free is a fallacy, because that would be heartbreaking to them.
mm.
And I think you can see that throughout our society at the moment. I mean, when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, it seemed obvious to anyone outside of that bubble that he was not going to win the 2019 election. But I did some work with the comms teams around there, and people were convinced that 2019 was his. And what did you see? You saw the greatest electoral defeat that Labour had had in like 50 years or something like that. And so everyone is just trying to confirm their biases. They're living in echo chambers online. They're not critically thinking about how they're retrieving the data that they're retrieving. And it's spilling out into real life where people are trying to influence the reality of everyone else with these perceptions that they're developing online. America's much worse for it. You have Pizzagate, you have QAnon, storming of the Capitol. These are all internet subcultures, or even the worst one was the Christchurch massacre at the mosque. Like that was one of the first examples of a meme massacre. And I'm not saying that in a crass way. I mean, he had memes written on his weapons. He live streamed it to Facebook and 8chan. And then as he was live streaming, people were memeing that. And so everything becomes, I guess, one step away from consequence, because it was born online, where you feel anonymous, you feel powerful, you feel like, you can get away with anything because it's a bit cowboy. And then it bleeds into real life, and there are real life consequences, but for everyone else, like you affect everyone else. The storming of the Capitol led to the suicides of like 6 police officers. And yeah, of course, the arrests and the prosecutions of hundreds of those people responsible, but there were thousands of people there. But people died that day and afterwards because of the trauma that they faced. But I'm sure that some of those people are still online, still doing the same thing, still believing they didn't learn anything from that experience. They weren't awakened. And I think that's the most terrifying thing, is like, the reality that I think a majority of people would agree was true, or the truth, or how most of us go through life, is a fantasy to be woken up from to some people, and they will still continue to go and do the things that they do, and damaging other people's lives.
So as you said, it's almost impossible to get through to some people, because the more you push, the more they hold on to their core beliefs, even if their core beliefs are wrong.
Yeah.
And, when you're trying to show them information that conflicts that information, they either become aggressive or they shut off.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if they don't trust scientists or, government, where most of the research comes from.
Yeah.
They're just never going to buy it.
No. And something I've noticed that's been prevalent from everything from far left groups, far right groups, anti-vaxxers, your alien conspiracy theorists, your crystal loving wellness freaks, the whole thing. There's always this secret cabal of people pulling the strings, and they have all the money. And I'm thinking, what does this sound like? Because this doesn't sound like a good thing. And when I say that, I mean, it sounds anti-Semitic.
Yeah, the whole basis of that is anti-Semitic, and it still has anti-Semitic undertones.
So there is an undercurrent of anti-Semitism in all of these things, and I think that needs to be confronted too.
I don't always think it is aimed as anti-Semitic, but the basis of that is still anti-Semitic, if you know what I mean.
No, for sure.
I don't think it's every single person.
No.
Because I we've said it earlier in this, that the people pulling the strings of the government.
Yeah. Of course,
and they're looking after their mates.
Yeah. But then you see it as like so this is where I really find it interesting, because we have proof of that, the stuff that we're talking about, like in this country, Tory cronyism and stuff. So there's already a disconnect between the people who make the laws and the people, right? So there's this distrust. And then when someone comes along and builds that further, it's just like, you don't understand the world right now. Well, I can explain that. it's because there's a secret cabal of people pulling the strings. I mean, you would look at our national government system and you would be like, okay, absolutely. And then it's as you go down the rabbit hole that those beliefs become more refined,
Yeah.
and there is the possibility to get more toxic, for sure. But like, definitely governments around the world have not been doing their part to foster trust with the people that they're governing. And that is leading to this wider thing where we are trying to make sense of the world that we exist in. I like to try and think sometimes, of the events in my life that have kind of led us to where we are today. And I would say it's things like, a year or so before I was born, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then which affected how I grew up. And then there was 9/11, which was like the last under-mediated news event that occurred in my lifetime, because after that we all had smartphones with cameras and everything's got 100 angles and 100 different perspectives and 100 different interpretations. And then you have the 2008 financial crash, where suddenly the capitalist system that we existed under was kind of exposed to be a fraud, because these private institutions were bailed out. And so it just kind of exposed the fallacy within that system. And then if you take those events and you kind of extrapolate forward, then things like Trump, or the Leave Remain divide in this country, or the tribalism and the gamification of society through things like QAnon and conspiracy theories, all of this starts to make more sense, because you have within that like a roadmap to just distrust. Right? You were sold at the beginning of that story. The beginning of the events was like, the fall of the Berlin Wall is the end of history, right? We have done it. We have figured out all the problems. And then 9/11, it's like, okay, right? There is this new enemy. And then it's really anxiety inducing, and it creates all this kind of a conspiracy with truthers, and people are analyzing and overanalyzing with like different types of information that they're finding. And then that's leading to a pullback to things like nationalism, because you're trying to feel safe within your homeland, within your borders. The Department of Homeland Security was only created after 9/11, to my understanding. And then, further than that, you start getting this kind of anxiety about life. And then suddenly the financial side of you is just pulled out, the rug's pulled out from under you. And then, move forward 10 years, 2018 or whatever, you're real poor, you don't trust anyone, and you have access to all this information on the internet. It's probably...
Well, I was going to say there was the undercurrent of the internet through that entirety. Well, not all the entirety, but 2/3 of that entirety. There's been access to vocalize from anyone. And what, 12, 14 years ago, the internet was the Wild West. Where would you go for hard facts online? You had nowhere. So you were falling down to forum rabbit holes, and that's how all these little communities really got grips.
Like I think, but also you got to think about Web 2.0 and social media as well, like the evolution from the MySpace generation to Facebook. And then the way, I guess, I remember when I first started going online, there was this idea of like stranger danger, like it was a hangover from the 80s, but that had permeated into the social media age. By the time we were firmly into Web 2.0, it's kind of like everything is online. You have your persona online, and then you move further down that, and it's just like everything is gamified and everything is online, like Tinder, right? Tinder was a game. It's hot or not. And, in early iterations of Tinder, it would say, keep playing, not keep swiping. But now it says keep swiping, because like the whole thing was like, it evolved into being an actual dating app. And it kind of started to, especially accelerated through the pandemic, then replace, dating. Dating. And now everything is online. And, the person that I am on Tinder, or I am on Facebook, or I am on Instagram is not me. You know, the person on this podcast is also not me at home with my dog. You know,
I
like
was I was going to say, like, that's also bred a new insecurity in a lot of people, where if you're only ever seeing, again, falls back to the honeymoon period. If you're only ever seeing someone's honeymoon period online,
yeah,
and then you're looking at yourself sitting in your pants in your front room,
yeah,
thinking, what the fuck have I done wrong here?
yeah,
Look at all these superstars all going, having nice drinks and great time, and you're in deep depression. And
yeah.
all of a sudden, it's so toxic for your, like, inner mind and mental health.
I like jumping off from that. I'd say my last relationship, there was two things. One, I was always going down YouTube holes thinking, why couldn't I be making videos that were as slick as this or whatever? And always thinking, oh, I am missing out on something. Whilst my partner at the time was constantly scrolling through Instagram, looking at travel posts, thinking, why can't I travel the world? Even when we were bloody traveling the world. You know, and that to me, that was when it like properly clicked that something is very wrong here. We're sitting on like some mountaintop in Africa, you know, like having an adventure of a lifetime. And, you know, we get back to where we're staying and you're immediately on Instagram looking at Thailand or Indonesia or wherever, you know. That's mad. That's mad. It's like it's never enough. It's never
No.
enough anymore.
That's why a lot of people see the world through the camera.
Yeah, yeah. And they live through that camera, and that means that, you know, that every event just holds so much more power. It's almost like if things aren't filmed, it doesn't exist. It didn't happen. And you know, it's like to use a really tragic example, you know, would the death of George Floyd have had so much international impact if that 17-year-old girl hadn't filmed it?
No.
So if she hadn't filmed it, then it wouldn't have happened. It would have been forgotten about. Of course, it would have happened to the family. It would have happened to the people who witnessed it, but it wouldn't have led to any long-term change, any kind of structural changes, or even just the widespread show of grief that
Well,
people showed.
that's the power of, that's the potentially the good, not the it's the good side of being able to capture everything on your phone nowadays. Is people can't hide.
No, you can't hide. But the thing is, it's almost like back in the day, back in the good old days, which is also like that's actually because this COVID pandemic will be the good old days to someone in the
Oh,
future. So
hell
that's
no.
like that is a terrifying concept. But yeah, back in the good old days, there, you know, there was almost like you could dig up cold cases. You know, you could put together the evidence. Like there was an idea that things didn't necessarily die just because it wasn't caught on camera, because it wasn't caught. But then worse than that, it's not that it just has to be caught on camera. It has to be caught on camera from 12 different angles. So many times people have said to me, well, you know, I don't really agree with stop and search, but that video just shows one perspective. I'm like, what do you expect the next video to prove? You know, how much do you need? Because you need more data. You need to analyze more things, but there's no critical thinking added to that analysis. And you want to constantly be open to the idea that, you know, you're being lied to. It's the anxiety and distrust of our modern day society.
Yeah, and then that snowballs even more because a lot of people don't want to take the responsibility or the acknowledgement that their life isn't great, and it's
Yeah.
easy. It's easier to feel like you're being lied to, or potentially we have been sold a shitty dream
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you're gonna have the best life and you're gonna do this. You can be a rock star.
Yeah.
You can be that famous footballer.
Yeah.
Not everyone can.
No, there's 7 billion plus of us on this planet. How many
Yeah.
famous footballers are there? There's only one
Well,
Messi.
there's only one Ronaldo.
There's only one Ronaldo, yeah.
And then, people saying, well, you could be that next Ronaldo, but there can't be that many.
No, no, absolutely not. But like, it's the dream that keeps you working. I remember I was chatting to this. I went on this date once, and this girl was saying to me, she was like, "You know what? I want to be a billionaire in the next 5 years." And I was like, "Do you?" I didn't say this to her because I just, I don't have that confidence. But I was like, kind of thinking, do you actually know how much a billion is? You know what I mean? Like, when you look at Jeff Bezos's hundreds of billions, you do realize that he could give us all a billion each and still have like 120 billion or whatever. I'm not saying that would be a good thing for our economic system either, but I'm just saying that's how many billions he has if you want to be a billionaire. Like, there's also this misunderstanding of how rich these people are and how unattainable these things actually are.
Mm. It's do you know what? It's either you or Noah, who we've had on here before, put a link up saying that it was a screenshot from a Twitter saying most people who back with these super wealthy don't really realise that they're more close to being homeless and dead than they ever are to being a billionaire.
Yeah, I think that's extremely true. And I mean, like, through my life, I've bounced from being no fixed abode, like rough sleeping or sleeping on sofas or sleeping in like um non-typical accommodation solutions, to living in quite nice houses and having like a pretty middle class lifestyle, because the work that I do, um is precarious work generally. So sometimes I have money and sometimes I have nothing. And that's fine. But I also know that other people in my profession live in mansions, but I know that I'm actually one step closer to sleeping rough again than I am to sleeping in a mansion.
Hmm. Very sombering podcast, this one. It's normally a lot of laughs and
Apologies. I think it's just because it's us two bouncing off of each other. I'm
yeah.
actually in a pretty jovial mood, but we're talking about some pretty
No,
dark stuff.
I knew this was going to happen. This is the conversation we normally fall down into, and that's why I was hoping Aaron was going to come, because he could have been
Brought some levity to the
he could have
conversation.
been the shining sunshine in our doom and gloom.
Oh, well, this is the thing. Look, I actually think, like, if we're gonna, I guess, end on a positive note, I think the thing is there's enough smart people in the world who are critically thinking about things, who can um, help educate all of us. I'm not trying to say in any way that, like, I have answers. I have no answers. I'm half the time I'm in a deep depression wondering what's the point. But I see things like the younger generation and these kids, and they care about shit, and they're educated, and they're trying to figure out ways that they can educate each other and escape these kind of structural inequalities and build movements and build things that are bigger than themselves and are meant to benefit wider society. And that's something that our generation, our like slacker generation, hasn't necessarily achieved. It's what boomers definitely didn't even care to think about. But we see it coming. Will it be too late? Hopefully not. But that's kind of like my positive take on all the stuff that we talked about. It's not over and it's not ended. And there's so many crazy cool kids who are going to do amazing stuff in the future.
Yeah, see, I think the older I've got, the more robust I've come with how I feel about the world, because I always try to look at the realism side of things. The glass half full, the glass
Yeah.
half empty. You just need to be happy that you have the glass,
Yeah.
and that the realism when they're out sailing a boat and it's pissing down with rain. The optimistic prays for the sun, and the pessimist cries because of the rain. But the realistic people readjust the sails and get on with it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how you can't keep dreaming about being a billionaire and winning the lottery, and you can't keep letting yourself get so downtrodden that you fall into a hole. And I've been there in that hole, and I know that's it's not what you want to hear when you're in the hole, but
No.
it's only you that can pull yourself out of that hole. And there isn't an easy answer to getting out of that hole, but hopefully you don't stay in that hole for too long.
Yeah.
But it
Well,
is
I mean,
doable.
I think all humans kind of share this existential kind of crisis. It's an everyday existential crisis. And I think that's some really good advice, is just, like, without being dismissive of people's personal struggles, but you have to pull up your britches and lean on your support network if you have one, but it's going to be your motivation and your drive that's going to help you put your next foot in front of.
You need to seek out the help that you need to get better.
Yeah,
it's not just going to be handed to you, and especially not when you're in that spiral of, it's never going to get better anyway. What's the point? Because that's how I was for a long time.
Yeah, and you start just assessing everything differently, and that's not positive either. So you have to have a positive mindset about things, which is really hard to do when you're down that hole, but you have to look for the light in life. And sometimes I think the light in life is just that you have the glass rather than you have the contents of the glass, because at least you can fill it.
Exactly. And it's not about always being optimistic, because I hate the people that say, oh, smile, cheer up, it's not that bad.
No,
I'm just a grumpy fuck. But
also hope is just one step away from resignation, right? You have to make so many compromises along the way to get to your hopeful outcome that, it's not really the same thing that you wanted in the beginning anyway, and so you have to be realistic about that as well. But that's just part of growing up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm gonna pull the plug here. It's been lovely to have you, Adrian. I will have you back for what I will call probably the most somber podcast we've done to date.
I apologize. I want to come back with the rest of them so it can be a normal podcast and I don't have to bring the mood down.
I like it. It's good.
Good. All right. Well, I really loved it.
I feel like I should get Noah on our next one, and we can just have the down podcast.
Yeah, why not? You need a down one every so often to just balance things out, right?
That's it.
The yin and the yang. Well,
the yin and